The asphalt was hot enough to feel through a shirt, and Marcus Calloway's cheek was pressed flat against it, with the particular intimacy of something that was never supposed to happen, the kind of contact between skin and concrete that belongs in nightmares, and not in the parking lot of a shopping mall on a Saturday afternoon in late spring, when the light was golden and the air smelled faintly of exhaust and cut grass and the ordinary life of a city going about its business. Officer Ryan Garrett's knee was between his shoulder blades, and the weight of it was not incidental. It was deliberate. The full press of a man's body weight applied to a 16-year-old boy who had not moved, had not resisted, had not done anything except exist in a parking lot with a shopping bag and a backpack full of school books. And now the boy was trying to breathe and finding that breathing required more space than he currently had access to. 3 feet away, a paper shopping bag had been torn open, and its contents scattered across the ground. A soft, rose-gold hoodie, the kind a 13-year-old girl might circle in a photo and text to her older brother with a string of heart emojis, lay crumpled against the dirty concrete, one sleeve already darkening where it had absorbed something from the parking lot surface that would not wash out easily. Scattered beyond the bag, tumbling slowly in the warm afternoon draft that moved between the parked cars, were pages from a folder that had been tossed aside without being opened college letterhead, the kind of paper that institutions print important things on. And if you looked closely at the page that had drifted farthest, and was now flattening itself against the tire of a minivan, you could read the words Massachusetts Institute of Technology across the top and below. That a name, and below that the word congratulations. 22 people stood in a rough crescent at the edge of the scene, and every single one of them had a phone raised, and not one of them moved, because there are moments in public life when the presence of authority, even authority behaving badly, especially authority behaving badly, produces a paralysis that people will feel guilty about later when they are watching the footage they filmed from safety. Officer Garrett's radio crackled something unintelligible, and his partner stood 4 feet back with his hand on his own belt and his face arranged into an expression that was not quite neutrality and not quite distress, but lived somewhere in the narrow, uncomfortable hallway between them. Then the sound arrived from the far end of the parking lot. Tires not screaming exactly, but speaking with urgency, and then doors, multiple doors opening fast, and footsteps, and the specific quality of movement that belongs to people who have somewhere very particular to be and intend to arrive there without delay. Garrett looked up, and whatever he saw at the far end of that parking lot did something to his face that the parking lot had not done, that the scattered MIT pages had not done that, the 22 phones had not done it, took the color out of him starting at the jaw and moving upward, and his hand, which had been resting with proprietary ease on the radio at his shoulder, came down. What could make a man like that go pale? Stick with this story because the answer changes everything. And it started 35 minutes ago with a boy buying a birthday present for his little sister. There is a specific quality of freedom that exists only on Saturday afternoons in late May, when you are 16 years old and school is almost over, and the week ahead has not yet arrived to make its demands. And Marcus Calloway had been living inside that particular quality of freedom for approximately 40 minutes when he pushed through the glass doors of Reverie and stepped into the main corridor of Riverside Crossings Mall with a shopping bag in one hand and his phone buzzing in the other. He was not a boy who had been handed things easily, which was something you understood about him quickly if you spent any time in his orbit. Not because he announced it or wore it visibly, but because of the way he moved through spaces with attention, with deliberateness, with the particular economy of someone who has learned that effort and outcome are connected, and that the connection requires maintenance. His room in the apartment on Delmar Avenue that he shared with his mother Diane and his younger sister Brianna had a basketball on the floor near the closet, and a calculus textbook open on the desk, and a whiteboard on the wall covered in problem sets that he had not erased because he liked to see his own thinking. The false starts the corrections, The moments where something clicked, and neither the basketball nor the calculus surprised anyone who knew him, because Marcus Calloway existed comfortably in multiple registers simultaneously, and that was simply who he was. He attended Westbrook Academy on a merit scholarship that he had applied for twice before receiving it, and the second application had been better than the first, because he had understood by then what they were actually asking, which was not what are your accomplishments, but who are you, when no one is watching. And he had answered that honestly and gotten in, and the scholarship covered tuition and books, but not the bus fare or the second-hand uniform blazer that his mother had taken in at the shoulders herself with a needle and thread on a Sunday night, while he sat at the kitchen table doing homework and pretended not to notice. His mother, Diane, worked double nursing shifts at Riverside General 3 days a week and single shifts the other 2, and she did this without complaint in the way that certain people carry weight, not because they don't feel it, but because they have decided that the alternative is worse, and the decision was made a long time ago and does not require revisiting every morning. And Marcus understood this about his mother, in the way teenagers understand things about their parents, that they cannot yet fully articulate, but that live in them, anyway, shaping the way they move through the world. His father in his phone was listed simply as NW, an abbreviation. His father had asked him to use years ago casually in the way that parents make requests of children that seem quirky and minor at the time, and that the child accepts without pushing, because there are some things you sense you are not supposed to push on, and Marcus had not pushed, had simply created the contact as NW and filed the reason away in the part of his brain that held things he would understand better later. He was at the mall because tomorrow was Brianna's 13th birthday, and Brianna had sent him a screenshot 3 weeks ago of a rose gold hoodie and matching scrunchie set from a boutique called Reverie. And the screenshot had included absolutely 0 words, just the image dropped into their text thread with the specific confidence of a 12-year-old who does not feel the need to explain her desires because they are, in her estimation, self-evident. And Marcus had looked at the image for about 4 seconds, and then opened his banking app and checked his balance, which was $67, and the hoodie set was $58.40, which left him $860 for the rest of the week before his next tutoring payment came in, and he had decided without particular drama that this was fine. He had counted the money twice that morning before leaving the apartment, standing at the kitchen counter in his navy hoodie and jeans. His backpack, already packed for the afternoon calculus problem, said his English copy of Their Eyes Were Watching God, a folder of notes he needed to review, and Brianna had wandered through in her pajamas, poured herself cereal, looked at him with the specific expression of someone who knows a secret is being planned on their behalf and is choosing not to spoil it, and said absolutely nothing, which was its own kind of gift. The mall was loud and warm, and smelled the way malls smell, a combination of food court grease and department store fragrance, and the particular neutral air of a large building that circulates its own atmosphere. And Marcus had gone directly to Reverie, found the hoodie in Brianna's size without difficulty, because it was exactly where the screenshot had shown it, picked up the matching scrunchie set, and carried both to the register where a woman named Carol Simmons, who was in her mid-50s with reading glasses pushed up onto her forehead, and a warmth that felt entirely unperformed, had rung him up with genuine cheerfulness. The total came to $58.40. His debit card was approved on the first attempt, and Carol had placed the receipt inside the bag, tucking it carefully between the folded hoodie and the tissue paper she had wrapped the scrunchie set in. And she had said, "Your sister's going to love this," in the tone of someone who means it. And Marcus had said she's turning 13 tomorrow. Big day, and Carol had smiled the smile of a woman who has a niece, or a daughter, or some girl she loves and knows exactly what 13 feels like. And Marcus had taken the bag and turned to leave. He texted his mother a photo of the bag with a heart emoji. He was happy, a specific, uncomplicated, earned happiness that existed without qualification. And he was still inside it when he walked through the glass doors into the afternoon sun, which hit his face with the warmth of a season, finally committing to itself, and he adjusted his backpack and checked his phone and started typing a reply to Brianna, who had texted "You better not get me something boring." He never finished the reply. Dennis Pruitt had been working mall security for 22 years, which was long enough to have developed what he called instincts, and what the 3 formal complaints filed against him in the past 2 years called something else. Though the complaints had been handled internally by the contracting firm that employed him, and had resulted in nothing more consequential than a conversation with a supervisor who needed Pruitt's shift coverage more than he needed to be principled about the conversation. He was 58 years old, broad through the middle, with a security firm badge laminated in a holder on his belt, and a radio he kept at a volume slightly too loud in the way of men who want the people around them to be aware that they are in communication with authority. And he walked the corridors of Riverside Crossings with the proprietorial ease of someone who has decided that this particular territory belongs to him in some meaningful sense, even if the sense is difficult to articulate legally. He had applied to join the Riverside Police Department. When he was 34, had gone through 2 rounds of the application process before being informed that he would not be moving forward, and this rejection lived inside him in the way that certain failures do not in the foreground of his daily thinking, but embedded in the foundation of it, shaping the angle at which he approached authority and its trappings, and his relationship to both. So that when he wore the security badge and carried the radio and walked the mall corridor with his particular swagger, he was doing something that was about more than the job. He genuinely believed, and this is important to understand about Dennis Pruitt, that he was good at what he did, that his instincts were reliable, that his pattern recognition was an asset, that 22 years of watching people in commercial spaces had given him an ability to read situations that more formal training could not replicate, and he had never been required to examine this belief closely enough to find its fault lines, which meant the belief had calcified rather than matured, and the difference between those 2 things was the distance between wisdom and something more dangerous. At 2:41 in the afternoon, the alarm at Tech Corner Electronics, a store that sold headphones and tablets and laptop accessories, and sat 3 stores down from Reverie on the South Corridor, went off with the particular electronic shriek that security alarms produce, which is designed to be impossible to ignore, and succeeds at this while conveying no useful information whatsoever about what has actually happened. Pruitt responded within 90 seconds, jogging down the corridor with his hand on his radio, arriving at Tech Corner to find the store clerk pointing at the south exit and speaking very quickly about a man in a red hoodie who had grabbed 2 pairs of wireless earbuds off the display and run before the sensor tags had time to register at the door. The actual suspect in this matters, this is the detail that everything else turns on, was a white male in his early 20s, wearing a red hoodie and a baseball cap pulled low, carrying no backpack, who had exited through the north corridor at 2:39 and was fully gone before Pruitt's radio crackled to life, and certainly before Pruitt arrived at Tech Corner with his slightly too loud radio and his 22 years of instincts. Pruitt stood at the Tech Corner entrance and looked south the direction the clerk had pointed, which was either misdirection from panic or a simple error of orientation in a stressful moment, and keyed his radio and delivered a description that was catastrophically imprecise: black male, teenager, dark hoodie, backpack, heading toward the south exit. Red had become dark. Early 20s had become teenager. No backpack had become backpack. North exit had become south. Every single factual element of the description was wrong, transformed by the specific alchemy of a man who sees what his instincts have preloaded him to see, and whose instincts over 22 years had never been seriously interrogated. He scanned the south corridor after delivering the description, and his eyes moved the way eyes do when they are searching for something they have already decided they will find, passing over a white teenager with a shopping bag, passing over a Hispanic teenager with earphones around his neck, passing over a group of middle school-aged girls, walking in a cluster, and landing on Marcus Calloway, who was 50 yards away from Tech Corner. walking in the opposite direction from the store coming out of Reverie, with a shopping bag and a backpack, wearing a navy hoodie that was not red but was dark, and who was the only black teenager visible in that section of the mall at that moment. The geometry of assumption is not complicated, but it is devastating in its efficiency. Pruitt was looking for a black teenager in a dark hoodie with a backpack, and there was Marcus, and the match required no further analysis in Pruitt's mind, because the 22 years of calcified instinct did not include a step for verify. Before you act, it only included the step for act. He keyed his radio again. I've got eyes on a possible suspect the south corridor moving to intercept. He did not move to intercept because Marcus was already heading toward the exit, and would reach it before Pruitt covered the distance, so instead he flagged the patrol unit officer Ryan Garrett, who was 2 blocks from the mall in his cruiser, and who received the call with his lights already half reaching for the switch. Marcus Calloway, 50 yards from Tech Corner receipt in his bag, walking toward sunlight and his phone and his sister's birthday, had no idea that a man who had never looked closely at his own assumptions had just named him as a suspect in a theft he had not committed in a store he had not entered for a crime that had already been over for 2 minutes. His phone buzzed the contact labeled NW, his father a text that said, "On my way, son. Be safe out there." Marcus typed back "Love you, Dad," and pocketed his phone and kept walking. Ryan Garrett had been a Riverside police officer for 14 years, which was long enough to have learned which parts of the job he was good at and which parts he had decided were not worth being good at. And the distinction between those 2 categories had shifted over the years in ways that would have concerned the version of himself who had sat in the academy classroom and written "serve and protect" in a notebook with the uncomplicated sincerity of someone who had not yet learned what the job actually asked of you on the days when it asked the hardest things. He was 38 years old, broad through the shoulders in the way of a man who had been athletic in his 20s and had maintained the structure of that athleticism without maintaining the discipline. And he moved through spaces with a deliberateness that was meant to be read as authority, and usually was because physical presence is its own argument in the absence of other information. And Garrett had learned early that arriving in a space in a certain way meant that the space rearranged itself around you before you had said a single word. 3 excessive force complaints in 6 years. The first one when he was in his 5th year on the force, the second 2 years after that. The third, 18 months ago, had all been handled internally, resolved through the specific machinery of departmental self-protection that exists not because departments are uniformly corrupt, but because institutions tend to protect their continuity above other values when the pressure is applied in the right places. And Garrett had emerged from each complaint without formal sanction, which he had interpreted as vindication, and which was not precisely the same thing. Last month, Sergeant Douglas Holt had placed a formal written reprimand in Garrett's file, following an incident in the parking lot of a pharmacy on Clement Street, where a disagreement about a parking space had escalated into something that left a man with a bruised forearm and a genuine fear about whether he would be believed when he described what had happened. He was not believed, not in any official sense, but the reprimand was there with Holt's signature on it, and Garrett carried it the way he carried things that injured his sense of himself, close, irritating, reshaping his behavior, not into something more careful but into something more urgent, because urgency is what certain men substitute for reflection. He needed a clean arrest, something straightforward, something undeniable, something that would sit in his file as a counterweight to the reprimand and remind anyone reviewing his record that he was at his core a productive officer who generated results. His partner that afternoon was Officer James Devereaux, 26 years old, 1 year, removed from the academy and still in the process of discovering what kind of officer he intended to be, a process that is more complicated than the academy suggests, and that involves on certain specific afternoons sitting in the passenger seat of a cruiser while a 14-year veteran says things you know are wrong, and finding that your voice has gone somewhere you cannot immediately locate. Devereaux had been raised by a mother who was a social worker and a father who drove a school bus. And he had come to law enforcement with something that was not naivete exactly, but was adjacent to it, a belief that the gap between what the job was supposed to be and what it sometimes was could be navigated with enough personal integrity. And 6 months of riding with Garrett had complicated this belief substantially without yet resolving it into anything actionable. Garrett received Pruitt's description at 2:42 p.m. Black male teenager, dark hoodie backpack, and turned his lights on before he had pulled up the Tech Corner report, before he had asked dispatch for any additional detail, before he had done any of the things that procedure suggests you do when a piece of information arrives that you are about to act on. He told Devereaux during the 90-second drive to the mall that this was a pattern area, 3 retail thefts in the past 6 weeks, he said, which was true, though none of them had involved a suspect who matched Pruitt's description in any particular, and that you had to be proactive in these situations, get ahead of it, which sounded like professional judgment, and was functioning as something else. Devereaux looked out the passenger window at the strip of shops and restaurants on the approach to Riverside Crossings, and thought about saying something and found the gap between the thought and the words too wide to cross in the time available, which is a failure he will carry forward into the next version of himself, and which he is not yet aware he will be given a specific opportunity to address. Garrett pulled into the Riverside Crossings parking lot with the specific purposefulness of a man who has already decided what he is going to find there, and what he found immediately stepping through the glass doors of the south exit into the afternoon sun with a shopping bag in one hand and a phone in the other was a 16-year-old boy in a navy hoodie whose name he did not know, and whose receipt he had not seen, and whose story he had not asked for, and whose face in that first second of visual contact from across the parking lot registered in Garrett's mind not as a person, but as a confirmation. He put the car in park and got out, and his hand went to his belt by habit, and Devereaux followed 2 steps behind, and the distance between the cruiser and the glass doors was maybe 30 yards, and Marcus Calloway was adjusting his backpack and typing a text to his sister, and had no idea that the afternoon was about to become something he would spend the rest of his life trying to integrate into his understanding of what the world is and what it owes him. The sun hit Marcus's face when he pushed through the glass doors, and it was the kind of warmth that feels personal in late May, the warmth of a season that has finally decided to commit. And he stood for a moment just inside the threshold of the parking lot, letting his eyes adjust from the mall's fluorescent cool to the afternoon gold. And he shifted his backpack higher on his shoulders and looked down at his phone, where Brianna had texted you, "Better not get me something boring." And he was mid-smile and mid-reply when he heard the voice. "Stop right there." He looked up. Ryan Garrett was crossing the parking lot toward him with the directional certainty of a man who has already decided where he is going and what he will find when he gets there. And his partner was 2 steps behind. And even before Garrett had covered half the distance, Marcus understood what was happening. Because he had been taught to understand, it had been walked through the specific grammar of this kind of encounter by both his mother and his father in 2 separate conversations, that he had filed away in the part of his brain labeled things I will need, and now he needed them. He raised both hands slowly, phone in one shopping bag in the other, fingers spread and visible, and said clearly, "Officer, I think there might be a mistake." Garrett did not slow down. He covered the remaining distance and stopped closer than procedure required, which was its own communication, and told Marcus to empty his pockets. Marcus complied, narrating each movement aloud the way his father had taught him. "I'm reaching for my wallet with my left hand. Here it is. I'm setting it on the hood, moving with the deliberate slowness of someone who understands that every gesture in this context will be interpreted, and that the interpretation is not neutral, moving so carefully that it looked to the people beginning to gather at the periphery of the scene like a performance of innocence, which is the specific cruelty of a situation where innocence has to perform itself to be believed. His wallet came out, his keys, his phone. Garrett snatched them in sequence, barely looking at each, and then grabbed Marcus's shoulder and turned him toward the nearest car. a blue sedan that belonged to a woman currently watching from 15 feet away with her grocery bag still in her hands, and told him to put his hands on the hood. The metal was hot, the kind of hot that builds up over an afternoon in a parking lot, and Marcus pressed his palms flat against it and spread his fingers and said nothing, because he was saving his words for the moments that would matter most, and this was not one of them yet. Garrett tore open the shopping bag. He pulled out the rose gold hoodie, held it for a moment in the way you hold something when you're trying to find what is wrong with it, and then dropped it on the ground. The scrunchy set followed. Then he found the receipt crumpled between the tissue paper and the hoodie and held it up and looked at it for approximately 2 seconds before he crumpled it in his fist and dropped it next to the hoodie. Marcus watched his sister's birthday present land on parking lot concrete that had not been cleaned recently, and he felt something move through him that was too complex to name in the moment: grief and anger, and a very specific kind of helplessness that does not come from weakness, but from the recognition that there are situations in which doing everything correctly is not sufficient protection. And he kept his hands on the hot metal hood and kept his voice level. "Officer, I have the receipt right there. The store clerk can confirm the purchase. I was in Reverie, not Tech Corner. If you check the security footage inside, you'll see me at the register." Garrett looked at him with the expression of a man who has heard many variations of this speech and has developed a comprehensive immunity to it. "Anyone can fake a receipt," Garrett said. Devereaux had Marcus's student ID from the wallet and was reading it with genuine attention. Westbrook Academy, age 16, an honor roll sticker in the corner, and he held it out toward Garrett and said something about it quietly, trying to introduce a note of reconsideration, and Garrett's response was to not look at it not once, and to continue the pat-down while the shopping bag contents lay on the ground, and the crowd at the edge of the scene grew from 8 to 14 to 22 people, every single one of them with a phone. The crowd had the particular composition of a Saturday afternoon at a suburban mall: white mothers with strollers, older couples with shopping bags, teenagers in clusters who had stopped to watch with the specific fascination of young people who understand that something significant is happening but have not yet calibrated their response to it, and they arranged themselves at a respectful distance that was also a safe distance, which are not always the same thing, but were in this situation functionally identical. Among them, near the back, was Mrs. Elaine Morse, 67 years old, black, who had been shopping for her granddaughter's school shoes, and had heard the commotion from 2 stores away and come to see what it was, and who now stood with her shopping bag at her side, and watched Officer Garrett handle a 16-year-old boy's belongings with the familiarity of someone who has owned them his entire life. And her expression was not surprise. It was something older and heavier than surprise, something that had been waiting for exactly this moment the way a stone waits at the bottom of a river. Near the front, filming steadily and without drama on her phone, was a teenage girl in a purple track jacket, whose name nobody at the scene knew, but whose footage would become one of the most important documents in the events of the next few days, because she had placed herself at the optimal angle, and had not once lowered her phone or changed her position with the calm attentiveness of someone who understood that what she was doing was important, and that importance requires steadiness. A white mother near the entrance had pulled her 8-year-old daughter slightly behind her, when Garrett drew close to Marcus a protective gesture, instinctive that her daughter would remember and ask about later that evening, and that the mother would struggle to explain in a way that was honest and age-appropriate simultaneously, and that would ultimately produce a conversation that neither of them expected, but that both of them needed. Carol Simmons came through the glass doors at a speed that was not quite running, but was the closest thing to it that a woman in retail shoes can manage on a Saturday afternoon, and she was holding her store tablet with both hands and calling out to the officers and breathing in the way of someone who had seen something wrong happening and had decided with minimal deliberation that she was going to do something about it, which is rarer than it should be. She identified herself to Garrett Clerk from Reverie, sold this young man those items approximately 12 minutes ago. She had the transaction record right here on her tablet. Time-stamped 2:43 p.m. debit card ending in 4471. She remembered him specifically because he was buying a birthday gift for his sister and had mentioned it at the register. She could pull up the store camera footage if needed. She held the tablet screen out toward Garrett. The transaction was visible, clear, time-stamped with the card number partially displayed and the item descriptions listed, and Garrett raised his hand palm out and told her to step back. She did not step back, she said. "But I have the proof right here, officer. He purchased these items. I sold them to him. He did not steal anything." Garrett told her again to step back, and this time his hand moved to his belt. Not to his weapon, but in the direction of it, and Carol's body registered this motion before her conscious mind had fully processed it. The ancient, reliable animal recognition of threat, and she took 2 steps backward, but she did not leave because she was also the kind of person who takes 2 steps backward when threatened and does not run, and those are not the same kind of person. Devereaux moved toward Carol not aggressively but with the subtle physical redirection of a young officer who has been trained to manage bystanders and has defaulted to that training in the absence of a better idea, and guided her gently toward the crowd's edge, and Carol went because the alternative was escalation. But she kept the tablet in her hands and she kept watching. And when Marcus caught her eye from his position against the car hood, she saw in his face not a plea, but something quieter and more devastating, which was simply acknowledgement. "I see that you tried." And she nodded once, and a tear she had not been expecting crossed her right cheek. Mrs. Elaine Morse had stopped being quiet. She was not shouting, but she had elevated her voice to the precise register that carries across a parking lot, without losing its fundamental dignity. And she was saying that this was wrong, that the boy had a receipt, that the officer had seen the receipt and thrown it on the ground, that there was a store clerk standing right there with electronic proof of purchase, and the officer had told her to step back. Other voices joined hers, not uniformly. Not from everyone, because crowds are not unanimous, and comfort with confrontation is unevenly distributed, and some people said nothing, and some turned away. And the man near the back, who had arrived in a truck with a contractor's logo on the door, filmed everything with the steady, unhurried attention of someone who has decided in real time that this particular footage matters. Marcus kept his hands on the hood of the blue sedan and breathed carefully and waited. Garrett's radio crackled with the specific urgent register that radios use when they are delivering information that has been upgraded without verification. Dispatch had received Pruitt's initial report, and somewhere in the chain of transmission, aggressive suspect had been elevated to suspect may be armed, which was not based on any evidence but on the specific institutional tendency to escalate threat levels when the details are uncertain, as though uncertainty itself is a kind of danger that requires its own category of response. Garrett's hand went to his holster, and then his weapon came out a clean, practiced motion that belonged to muscle memory, and the crowd reacted the way crowds react to the sight of a drawn gun in a parking lot, which is to say a collective sharp intake of breath that sounded like one person breathing, followed by a woman's voice from somewhere in the middle of the group, producing a high involuntary cry, followed by a child. The 8-year-old near the entrance beginning to cry in earnest, a sound that cut through everything else with the specific acuity of a child's fear in a public space. Marcus was already on his knees before Garrett had finished the command to get down. Not because the command compelled him, but because the gun compelled him, because his father had told him when he was 14 that the presence of a drawn weapon changed the physics of a situation entirely, that everything else receded, and the only thing that mattered was surviving the next 60 seconds. That dignity was something you retrieved afterward, and not something you could afford to protect in the moment, and his hands went above his head. Fingers spread, phone gone somewhere in the fall to his knees, and he said clearly for the crowd and for the cameras, and for whoever might review the footage of this later, "I am not armed. I am not resisting. Please don't shoot. I am not resisting." The words came out in the right order, with the right steadiness, because he had rehearsed them in a way that no 16-year-old should have to rehearse anything. And the rehearsal held even in the moment when fear was making everything inside him move very fast. He went face down when Garrett told him to, lowering himself to the asphalt with his hands visible the entire way. Moving slowly, narrating quietly, "I'm going face down. Now I'm complying. I am not resisting." And the concrete was hot against his cheek, hotter than he had registered with his palms, with the texture of a surface that had accumulated the day's heat and had nowhere for it to go, and tiny pieces of gravel pressed into his skin with the insistence of things that are small but not gentle. And then Garrett's knee came down between his shoulder blades. The weight was not gradual. It arrived in full all at once, and it did not shift or adjust or concern itself with Marcus's ability to breathe. And Marcus found that breathing required a volume of chest expansion that was no longer available to him, and he said, "I can't breathe," in the same steady voice he had been using, which required considerable effort, because the steadiness was doing something important, was keeping him recognizably himself in a situation that was trying to reduce him to something else. "Stop resisting," Garrett said. "I'm not resisting," Marcus said, and found that the sentence used most of the air he had managed to accumulate. The knee stayed. The clock in Marcus's head, which had continued running with the automatic precision of a mind trained to observe and record, even under duress, reached 43 seconds. And then Sergeant Douglas Holt pulled into the far end of the lot in a second cruiser and walked toward the scene with the measured pace of a senior officer who has seen this kind of thing before, and approaches it with something between wariness and resignation. Holt crouched beside Marcus, looked at his face at the scrape on his cheekbone that had produced a thin line of blood, and picked up the crumpled receipt from the ground, and smoothed it in his palm, and read it with the attention it deserved, which was more than it had previously received. And he asked Garrett whether Marcus had been patted down, and whether anything had been found, and the answers were yes and nothing. And Holt stood up and looked at the crowd and their phones, and the scattered pages and the rose-gold hoodie on the ground, and the store clerk still standing at the crowd's edge with her tablet pressed to her chest. And Marcus felt a flicker of something that was not hope exactly, but was its interior the sensation of a situation about to be corrected, the breath before the apology. "Bring him in," Holt said. "Better safe than sorry. Complete the report at the station." The flicker died. The handcuffs arrived, the click of each ratchet carrying in the afternoon air with a clarity that the phones at the edge of the crowd would all capture slightly differently, but would all capture. And the metal was cold against his wrists in a way that felt wrong in the warm afternoon, and the cuffs were too tighter than they needed to be tight enough that Marcus felt the compression on the bones of his wrists and filed it away with everything else he was filing, because documentation was the only form of control available to him right now, and he was using every bit of it. He was walked to the patrol car. He looked back once, and what he saw was his sister's rose-gold hoodie on the dirty ground, the scattered pages of his MIT acceptance folder, some of them already drifting toward the drainage grate at the lot's edge, Carol Simmons still holding her tablet with both hands, Mrs. Elaine Morse watching him go with an expression that was not pity, but was something she would carry home with her and sit with at her kitchen table for a long time afterward. The patrol car door closed. The sound was absolute. The crowd held its shape for longer than crowds usually do after the cruiser pulls away. There is a threshold of wrongness that extends the collective attention span, keeps people present when they might otherwise drift back to their interrupted errands. And for nearly 3 minutes after Garrett's car turned out of the parking lot, the 22 people who had been witnesses stood in something that was not quite a group and not quite a dispersal, caught between the momentum of what they had just seen and the ordinary gravity of a Saturday afternoon pulling them back toward their cars and their lists and their lives. Mrs. Elaine Morse was the first to speak at any length, and she spoke not to any particular person but to the general air of the parking lot in the measured, unsentimental voice of a woman who has seen enough of a specific thing to have developed a precise vocabulary for it. And she said that the boy had a receipt and the officer had thrown it on the ground, and that a store clerk had come out with a tablet showing the electronic transaction, and the officer had told her to step back, and that she, Elaine Morse, had lived in Riverside for 31 years, and had watched her son go through a version of this when he was 22, and her nephew when he was 18, and that none of it had been sorted out at the station, not the way the officer in the passenger seat had promised. She said this not in anger, which would have been understandable, but in the tone of someone providing a factual correction to a widely circulated misconception, and several people in the remaining cluster listened with the specific attention of people who are hearing something they already knew and had been hoping someone else would say. Carol Simmons had not moved from the parking lot edge. She was still holding her tablet with the transaction record on the screen, and she looked at it with the expression of someone holding evidence in a room where evidence has stopped mattering, which is its own particular kind of vertigo. She looked at the ground where the rose gold hoodie lay, and she thought about the boy at her register 30 minutes ago, telling her his sister was turning 13 tomorrow, and something hardened in her chest in a way that she would act on before the afternoon was over. Then she saw the phone. It was lying on the asphalt 6 feet from where Marcus had been kneeling, and its screen was lit. She could see it from where she stood, and it was showing a call incoming, the name on the screen visible from this distance, only as a bright glow. But when she walked over and picked it up, she could read it, NW calling. She stood, holding the phone, a teenager's phone. The screen, cracked at one corner, a small sticker of the MIT logo on the case, a detail she noticed and stored, and she let it ring twice more, and then she answered it. The voice on the other end was a man's voice, and it was calm in the precise way of voices that have chosen calm deliberately rather than arriving at it passively, the calm of someone who is managing something that would otherwise move very fast. And it said, "Marcus, where are you, son?" Carol told him what had happened, all of it in the sequence it had occurred, and she was accurate and she was thorough because she had been a witness to all of it, and because something about the voice on the other end of the phone told her that accuracy and thoroughness were what it needed. This voice would not be helped by softening or by ellipsis. It needed the facts in the order they had happened, and she provided them, including the patrol car number she had memorized when Garrett walked Marcus toward it, because she had known even in the moment that she would need it. There was a silence on the line when she finished, not the silence of shock, but the silence of a man who has just received information he already partially had and is integrating the rest of it with great care. Then the voice said, "Don't leave. I'm coming." The call ended. Carol stood in the parking lot holding the phone and looking at the space where the cruiser had been, and she thought about the 4 words and the voice that had produced them, and something about the combination of the two told her without any additional information that whoever was on the other end of that call was not going to be arriving as a distressed parent to a police station to ask politely that a misunderstanding be corrected. 12 miles away, a black SUV with government plates completed a U-turn at an intersection and began moving toward Riverside PD with a deliberateness that did not require speed. Leon Calloway was 48 years old and had been a federal law enforcement officer for 24 years, which meant he had been doing this work for 6 years longer than Ryan Garrett had been doing his, and the difference in what those years had accumulated was not only a matter of experience, but of the specific, particular way that experience had been applied, not just to cases and operations, but to the continuous project of understanding what law enforcement is for and what it costs when it forgets. He was the FBI Regional Director for the Midwest Division, a position he had reached through a career that included organized crime investigations, domestic terrorism task forces, and a 3-year assignment to the Civil Rights Division that he still considered the most important work he had done, because it had given him a precise, technical, case-by-case understanding of exactly what it looks like when the apparatus of law enforcement is turned against the people it exists to serve. And that understanding lived in him now as a kind of permanent alertness, a second set of eyes behind his own that never fully went off duty. He had received the location alert from the Family Tracking Protocol Standard for agents whose professional identities carry personal risk at 3:19 p.m., when Marcus's phone stopped moving at Riverside PD, rather than continuing toward the apartment on Delmar Avenue. And he had pulled the mall security feed through his office's remote access while still in his personal car, and he had watched 4 minutes and 17 seconds of footage before Carol Simmons answered the phone. The 4 minutes and 17 seconds of footage had shown him everything he needed to see, and what it showed him: his son's hands spread on the hood of a stranger's car, the receipt being dropped on the ground, the store clerk being turned away, his son's face going down to the asphalt, the knee, the 43 seconds the handcuffs produced in him. Something that moved at a temperature beyond anger. Because anger is what happens when things surprise you. And Leon Calloway was not surprised, which is perhaps the saddest thing about the footage and what it did to the man watching it. He drove at exactly the speed limit and he did not call the precinct. And this was not an oversight. The trap logic was simple, and he ran it in his head with the efficiency of a man accustomed to building cases if he called right now. 1. Call his name. His title. Marcus would be released within minutes quietly, with an apology that would be proportional to the embarrassment of the situation and nothing more. Garrett would receive a private word from Holt and go home. The arrest report, if it had already been started, would be quietly amended or disappeared. The 22 witnesses with their footage would disperse without any institutional anchor for what they had captured. The store clerk would go back to her register. Mrs. Elaine Morse would go home, and next Saturday, or the Saturday after that, Garrett would be back in his cruiser on the same street, and there would be another boy with a shopping bag and a navy hoodie, and that boy would not have an FBI director for a father, and there would be no call, and the receipt would stay on the ground, and the store clerk's tablet would be ignored, and that would simply be a Saturday afternoon that no one outside the parking lot would ever hear about. Leon called his deputy agent Victoria Reyes and gave her specific instructions in the clipped, precise language he used when time mattered and clarity mattered more. Assemble a team of 10 hold position outside Riverside P. D. Do not enter, do not identify, do not make contact with anyone inside until he gave the signal. Reyes asked how long they were likely to be waiting. Leon said long enough for him to finish what he started. He put the phone down and drove. He thought about Marcus, the boy who sent him photos of sunsets with no caption, who texted after every meal when Leon was traveling, who had filled out the MIT roommate questionnaire twice, because the first version he felt had not represented him accurately, and he let himself feel for the length of one traffic light the full weight of what the footage had shown him, the weight of a father watching his son go face down on hot asphalt while strangers filmed and no one moved. The light changed. Leon drove. He was sorry for what he was about to allow to continue for another 28 minutes, and he was going to carry that sorrow with him for a long time, and he was going to do it anyway, because the alternative protected one boy and left all the others exactly where they had always been. The back seat of Garrett's patrol car was molded plastic over a metal frame designed for containment rather than comfort, and it smelled of industrial cleaner, and something underneath the cleaner that the cleaner was not entirely managing. And Marcus sat in it with his hands cuffed behind his back, and his shoulder beginning to report the full inventory of what Garrett had done to it when he wrenched him toward the car, which was a dull, insistent ache that started at the socket and radiated in a way that made certain positions more tolerable than others and required him to shift his weight against the seat to find the least uncomfortable arrangement. Garrett was talking. He addressed Devereaux in the front passenger seat, but he was performing for the car, generally, for the dashboard camera for whatever version of the afternoon he intended to construct and carry forward, and the performance involved words like, instinct and pattern and protocol, and it involved a version of the events in the parking lot that Marcus, listening from the back seat, recognized as a selective reconstruction, technically composed of true things but arranged in an order, and with an emphasis that produced a conclusion that the unedited version of events did not support. Devereaux looked out the passenger window. His jaw was tight. He did not speak. Marcus was memorizing. He had been doing it since the moment Garrett approached him in the parking lot with the automatic trained attention his father had taught him to apply to situations exactly like this one. And now he was adding to the inventory badge number 147, visible on Garrett's uniform in the rearview mirror. Patrol car designation: Adam 22, stenciled on the dash. Devereaux's name tag readable when he had briefly turned around at the start of the drive. Dashboard clock showing 3:31 p.m. The specific language Garrett was using in the front seat, which Marcus was logging word for word. He thought about Brianna. Her birthday started at midnight, 13 hours away, when he had left the apartment that morning now, closer, and the rose gold hoodie was on a parking lot somewhere behind him, and the scrunchie set was somewhere near it, and the receipt was a crumpled ball that had landed near the rear tire of a blue sedan, and Carol Simmons was standing at the edge of a crowd holding a tablet with a time-stamped transaction that no one in an official capacity had looked at for more than 3 seconds. He thought about his mother, who was finishing a 12-hour nursing shift that would end at 6 p.m., and who would try to call him at some point after that, and who would not know any of this had happened until she could not reach him, and who would experience whatever interval existed between not reaching him and learning why, with the specific terror that black mothers carry through those intervals, a terror that has been earned by history and is not irrational. And he wished he could get a message to her, and the wishing was the closest he came to losing his composure in the car. His phone was in Garrett's front console. The screen lit up in the rearview mirror northwest. Calling. It rang and stopped. Marcus watched the mall disappear behind them as the car turned onto the main road. The parking lot, the glass doors, the strip of retailers on the south side, and in the last frame, before the turn took it out of view, he could see the small figure of Carol Simmons still standing at the parking lot edge, and he thought thank you in her direction with the particular intensity of a thought directed at someone who cannot hear it, but for whom you have no other medium available. Northwest. Calling. The screen lit again, rang, stopped. The city moved past the windows in its ordinary Saturday afternoon configuration, restaurants and dry cleaners, and a park where children were playing on equipment that caught the late afternoon light. And Marcus looked at all of it with the attention of someone who is outside a window. They are used to being inside. And he kept breathing carefully, steadily, storing everything because his father had told him once that documentation was the only power that survived the moment intact. That memory was the one thing no one could confiscate, and Marcus Calloway had an excellent memory and was using every cubic inch of it. Somewhere behind them, closing the distance at exactly the speed limit, was a black SUV, whose driver was also saving everything not in memory, but in the very precise, actionable sense of the word. Riverside PD occupied a building that had been designed in the 1980s with the aesthetic philosophy that functional spaces do not require beauty, and that the people who pass through them in either direction, detained or detaining, will not be improved by encountering it, and the result was a structure of concrete and fluorescent lighting and surfaces that absorbed sound without softening it, so that voices and footsteps and the mechanical hum of equipment combined into a constant low register that never went away, and that you stopped consciously hearing after 20 minutes, and that shaped your mood in ways you could not precisely identify. The desk officer was Nicole Briggs Black in her mid-40s, with the particular efficiency of someone who has processed enough intake forms to have reduced the task to its essential movements, while still bringing her full attention to each person she encountered because she had a philosophy about that, which was that the forms were not the point, the person was the point, and she applied this philosophy consistently, even on the afternoon when Garrett walked Marcus through the front entrance with his hand on Marcus's arm in the specific grip of a man who is establishing ownership. Garrett announced the charge: suspected retail theft, resisting detention, and Briggs typed without expression, and the system returned Marcus's record, which was clean in every column and had no priors of any kind at any point in the 16 years his name had been attached to a file anywhere, and Briggs noted this, and Garrett responded with a shrug that contained an entire argument she did not have the authority or the inclination to make on his behalf. Marcus asked for a phone call. He was told it would happen after processing. He asked again, and the answer was the same, and he noted in his internal inventory phone call requested at approximately 3:38 p.m., denied pending processing, and filed it alongside everything else. The handcuffs were removed, and Briggs saw the marks on his wrists, the deep red grooves where the steel had been tighter than standard protocol required, and she noted them on the intake form in the box labeled "Injuries" at time of booking, and the act of noting them was both a bureaucratic formality and a small quiet act of bearing witness that she performed without comment. Devereaux processed Marcus's belongings with the careful attention of a man trying to make his hands useful in a situation where his conscience was telling him his hands should have been useful earlier. Wallet keys, backpack cataloging each item on the form with a precision that bordered on penance, and Marcus watched him do it and said nothing. Sergeant Holt arrived from the mall, passed through the lobby without speaking to Marcus, and went directly to his office, and the door made a sound when it closed that carried the particular weight of a decision being deferred. Marcus was walked to holding room 3, a room at the end of a corridor that was shorter than it looked from the entrance, and the room was 10 feet by 10 feet, with a metal table bolted to the floor, and 2 chairs and gray walls that had absorbed the conversations of many previous occupants and retained none of them, and in the upper corner positioned to cover the full room, a camera with a blinking red light that never stopped. Devereaux said, "Sit tight, and this will get sorted out with the earnest inadequacy of someone delivering a reassurance they know is insufficient, but have not yet found the better alternative to," and then he was gone, and the door was closed, and Marcus Calloway was alone in a room that was 10 feet by 10 feet and smelled of floor cleaner and recycled air, and the accumulated anxiety of every person who had sat at this table before him. He sat. The clock on the wall read 3:47 p.m. Brianna's birthday was tomorrow. He sat without moving for a long time, long enough for the room to stop feeling like an emergency, and to start feeling like a fact, which is its own kind of worse. And he looked at the gray walls with the attention of someone who is using the act of looking at something as a way of holding himself together, which is a technique that does not appear in any self-help material, but that works in the specific physics of a locked room on a difficult afternoon with considerable reliability. His mother's version of the talk had been about survival, and it had been given to him at the kitchen table when he was 12 on a Sunday evening, when the news was showing something she could not fully protect him from, but could prepare him for, and she had spoken carefully and directly in the way she spoke about things that mattered, and the content was, keep your hands visible at all times. Say yes, sir, and no, sir, and nothing else, unless directly asked. Do not raise your voice, do not run, do not make any sudden movements, come home. The last item on the list had not been phrased as an instruction. It had been phrased as a need, and Marcus had understood the difference. His father's version had come 2 years later at 14, during a drive home from a basketball game, and it had been different in its emphasis without being different in its destination. His father had said, memorize badge numbers, note the time on a clock. If you can see one say aloud and clearly that you are not resisting because you want those words in whatever recording exists of the moment, and documentation is the only thing that survives intact when the memory of events becomes contested. His father had said this in the voice of someone who has read the case files which he had, and Marcus had understood that his father was not speaking theoretically. He had used both versions in the parking lot. He had used them correctly in the right sequence with the right tone, and he was still in this room, and the room did not change its dimensions or its smell, regardless of how correctly he had applied the things he had been taught. And that fact sat with him in the 10 by 10 space with the weight of something that had been true for a long time before today, and would continue to be true after today, and was in some fundamental sense the actual subject of both conversations at the kitchen table and in the car. He looked at the camera. He said clearly to the blinking red light in the corner, as if delivering a statement to a court of record. "My name is Marcus Calloway. I am 16 years old. I attend Westbrook Academy on a full merit scholarship. My GPA is 3.97. I was accepted to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in March. I came to Riverside Crossings Mall this afternoon to purchase a birthday gift for my younger sister. I paid for the gift with a debit card. I have a receipt." The store clerk witnessed the transaction and confirmed it. "I did not steal anything. I did not resist anything. I am not armed. I am not a threat. I am a 16-year-old boy who bought a birthday present." He said it without performance, without anger, without the rising cadence of someone seeking sympathy in the even, metered voice of someone making a record, because that was what his father had taught him, and that was what this camera was for, and that was the only form of agency available to him in this room. His shoulder ached. He rotated it carefully, testing the range, finding the angle where the ache was present but tolerable, and he held that angle and kept breathing. The clock on the wall read 4:02 p.m. He thought about Brianna's face when she opened the gift, the specific expression she made when something delighted her, which was not a wide-open expression but a controlled one, a smile she tried to keep small and couldn't, and he thought about how she was going to wear the rose gold hoodie the first day, and probably every day after that for 3 weeks, and he held that image in the room with him and let it do what it could against the gray walls and the recycled air and the 43 seconds of a knee between his shoulder blades that he was going to feel for several days yet. Devereaux came back at 4:19, and Marcus could tell from the way he held himself in the doorway, shoulders slightly forward, eyes not quite meeting Marcus's at first, that whatever he had come to say was something he had prepared himself to say, and found the preparation insufficient. He had pulled the mall security footage. He told Marcus this directly, which was a form of respect, even if what followed it was not. The footage was clear, he said. Marcus had not been near Tech Corner Electronics at any point during the afternoon. The camera at the Reverie Register showed him at 2:43 p.m., completing a transaction receiving a bag leaving. The camera at the South Corridor showed him walking away from Tech Corner, not toward it at the time the alarm went off. Marcus asked. "So I can go?" Devereaux said that Sergeant Holt needed to complete the report, first standard procedure, and that it would probably be about an hour. Marcus looked at him for a long moment without speaking. Not with hostility, but with the kind of attention that asks a person to hear their own words played back at them. And then he said, "You just told me. The footage shows I didn't do it. You have the footage. You have the store clerk's transaction record. You have the crumpled receipt in the parking lot. You have me saying since the first moment that I was at Reverie, not Tech Corner. And the answer to 'can I go' is wait an hour for standard procedure." Devereaux shifted his weight. He said he was on Marcus's side, and Marcus did not doubt that this was true in some internal sense, in the sense that Devereaux had a clear moral position that he was not currently executing, which is a specific kind of being on someone's side that does not in practice help them very much. Marcus asked, "Whose call is it?" Devereaux did not answer, which was itself an answer, and he left, and the door closed again with the same flat sound it had made before, and Marcus sat back down at the metal table and folded his hands on its surface and looked at them. He did not flip the table. He had a clear physical awareness of what it would look like on the camera in the corner, a 16-year-old black boy in a police holding room, showing rage regardless of the provenance of that rage, and he had seen enough footage of other people in rooms like this one to understand exactly how that image would be used, and what it would replace in the record of this afternoon, and what it would make harder for anyone who tried to help him afterward. So he sat, and he breathed, and he kept his hands folded on the table. And the stillness he achieved was not passivity. It was a choice made clearly and with full awareness of its cost to deny this room the version of him that would make what was happening to him easier to justify, and that choice required more from him than anyone watching the camera would ever know. The clock moved to 4:31 p.m. Outside, through walls he could not see through, 2 black SUVs had been parked across the street from Riverside PD for 14 minutes, their engines idling with quiet patience, their occupants receiving periodic updates through earpieces, and the man in the lead vehicle had not moved, had not gotten out, had not made any of the calls that would have ended this, because he was waiting for something specific. He was waiting for Devereaux to walk back in here and tell Marcus that the evidence proved his innocence, and that standard procedure required 1 more hour, and for that exchange to be captured on the camera in the corner of this room, because he needed that exchange in the record alongside everything else, and now it was there. The 14 minutes became 15, became 20, became 24, and the precinct went about its Saturday afternoon business phones ringing keyboards, tapping the water cooler in the corridor, gurgling with its periodic self-satisfaction, and in holding room 3. Marcus Calloway sat with his hands folded and breathed and waited, and the camera blinked its red light without interruption, and outside, Leon Calloway prepared to stop waiting. Garrett's arrest report was a document that revealed, in its word choices, the particular interior architecture of a man who has done something he cannot call wrong, and has therefore developed an alternative vocabulary for it, a vocabulary that lives in the formal passive register of official documentation, and that produces descriptions of events that are accurate in their individual components and false in their cumulative impression, which is a more sophisticated form of dishonesty than outright lying and considerably harder to prosecute. Suspect exhibited uncooperative behavior upon initial contact. This meant Marcus had asked why he was being stopped, refused to immediately comply with the officer's instructions. This meant he had moved slowly and narrated his movements, showed signs of agitation during the detention process. This was the most creative of the 3, referring to the moment Marcus had said, "I can't breathe," while Garrett's knee was on his back, which was not agitation but was a physical description of his respiratory situation. Garrett read the report back to himself after completing it, and found it satisfactory, which was genuinely how he experienced it, not as a falsification but as a translation. The transformation of what had happened in the parking lot into the language that official records speak, and the 2 things felt to him continuous rather than discontinuous, because he had been translating his actions into this language for 14 years, and the translation had become automatic enough that the gap between event and language had ceased to feel like a gap. Sergeant Holt came in and closed the door, and Garrett looked up with the mild attention of a man who expects to be told that the paperwork is in order. Holt laid 3 photographs on the desk printed from the mall security feed, the timestamp and camera angle visible in the corner of each image. The first showed Marcus at the Reverie Register at 2:43 p.m. The second showed Marcus in the South Corridor at 2:41 p.m. walking away from Tech Corner. The third showed the actual theft suspect, white male, early 20s, red hoodie, no backpack at Tech Corner at 2:38 p.m., visible from 2 camera angles simultaneously. Garrett looked at the photographs. He did not look at them for long. He said that the description from Pruitt had specified a dark hoodie and a backpack and a black male teenager, and that Marcus fit that description, and that given the proximity of the theft, Garrett placed the distance at 30 yards, which was a compression of 50 yards, but not the kind of compression that announced itself he had reasonable grounds for the stop. Holt told him that a dark navy hoodie was not a red hoodie, that 50 yards from a store is not at the scene, that the actual suspect had left through the north exit 6 minutes before Marcus walked out of the south exit, that the store clerk had come out with a transaction record and been told to step back. Garrett's face showed the micro-progression of a man for whom the facts are arriving in a sequence. His position requires him to contest first a dismissal, then a recalculation, then the settled stubbornness of someone who has committed to a version of events and experiences contradiction not as information but as a challenge to authority. He said, "Better safe than sorry." Holt stood in Garrett's office for a long moment without speaking, and what lived in that moment was a choice visible to both of them that Holt was working through in real time, the choice between what he knew was right, which was releasing Marcus immediately with an apology, and what the institution in which he had built his career was asking him to do, which was to complete the procedure that had been started, and trust that the procedure would eventually resolve correctly. The cost of choosing the institution in this moment was a 16-year-old boy in a holding room with handcuff marks on his wrists. The cost of choosing correctly was a conversation with Garrett's union rep and a written record of the correction. Holt chose the institution. He said he would draft the release paperwork when the report was complete standard procedure, and he left. Garrett turned back to his screen. He did not delete a single word of the report. He submitted it at 4:38 p.m., and the timestamp joined the arrest record, and the booking log, and the footage from Devereaux's body camera, and the footage from 22 phones in a parking lot, in a growing body of documentation that was taken together, a comprehensive record of everything that had happened, and why, and which was about to be used for a purpose that neither Garrett nor Holt had anticipated when they chose in their separate ways to continue. Leon Calloway had been parked across the street from Riverside PD for 28 minutes and had not gotten out of the car. He was in his personal vehicle, dark gray, unremarkable, the kind of car that disappears in a parking lot, and he was in his Saturday clothes, dark jeans, a gray shirt, the jacket he'd put on before leaving the apartment that morning, because the air had been cool at 9 a.m., and he was a man who wore layers and removed them as the day warmed. His FBI credentials were in the inner pocket of the jacket. They had been there all day and had not been in his hand once. On his phone, a text thread with Agent Victoria Reyes, who was in the lead SUV of a 4-vehicle team positioned half a block east of his position, and the thread showed 7 messages, all variations on team and position your call, and none of Leon's responses had moved from hold. He had the arrest report on his phone, a back-channel alert that his office received automatically when a federal civil rights flag was triggered by the combination of a minor's age the charge category and the absence of guardian notification, and he had read Garrett's language carefully and without surprise, and had noted the specific word choices that would matter later in a room with very different acoustics than the one in which they had been written. He thought about the 28 minutes. In those 28 minutes, 3 things had happened that needed to happen before he walked through that door. First, Garrett had completed and submitted the arrest report, which meant the documentation of what he had done was now official record, rather than working notes irreversible, bearing his badge number and his signature and the timestamp of 4:38 p.m. Second, Devereaux had told Marcus that the footage proved his innocence, and then left him in a holding room for another hour anyway, and that exchange was on the holding room camera, which was part of the institutional record. Third, Holt had seen the photographs from the mall security footage and had chosen the procedure over the obvious correct action, and that choice was documented in Holt's own words to Garrett, which Garrett's office camera had captured. The trap was complete. Every element was in the record. There was no version of events that could now be quietly amended or disappeared, because the amendment would have to contend with its own documentation, and the disappearance would have to explain its own absence. If Leon had called 28 minutes ago, one call his name, his title, Marcus, would have been released within minutes. Garrett would have received a private word. The report would have been quietly flagged and pulled. The footage from 22 phones in a parking lot would have circulated without any institutional anchor. Carol Simmons would have gone back to her register. Mrs. Elaine Morse would have gone home, and next Saturday, or the one after, Garrett would have been back in his cruiser, and there would have been another boy, and there would have been no call. Leon had made this calculation deliberately, and had chosen to let 28 minutes happen, and he was going to live with that choice in the full knowledge of what it had cost his son. And the knowledge was not comfortable, and was not meant to be comfortable, because the cost of a strategy is not separated from the strategy it is part of it, and you carry both. He sent the text to Reyes 2 minutes. He put the phone in his pocket and got out of the car. He crossed the street without hurrying, which is different from crossing. Slowly, there was nothing slow about it. There was only the pace of a man who has decided that what is about to happen will happen at the pace he sets, and not at the pace that adrenaline or anger or the accumulated gravity of 28 minutes of sitting across the street from where his son was held might otherwise impose. He reached the precinct entrance. He pushed through the door. The lobby was quiet in the way of a Saturday afternoon in a mid-sized police department. Briggs at the front desk, 2 officers at side desks filling out paperwork, a civilian sitting on a bench with a plastic bag of belongings on his lap, waiting for something to be resolved. The fluorescent lights hummed. The water cooler in the corridor gurgled. Briggs looked up. Leon said that he was here about Marcus Calloway, that Marcus was a minor who had been brought in approximately 45 minutes ago, and that he would like to speak with the officer who had processed him. Briggs's expression shifted as she pulled up the file, shifted again when she saw the booking status, and she reached for the intercom, and in the bullpen 30 feet away, Garrett heard the name Marcus Calloway, and stood up from his desk and came out to the lobby to tell this man that his son was being processed for retail theft and that the matter was under investigation. Leon looked at him and thanked him, and said he would wait, and sat down on the bench across from the civilian with the plastic bag. He took out his phone and sent one word to Reyes: "Now." Then he put the phone in his pocket and folded his hands, and sat with the patience of a man who has already decided how this ends. The precinct lobby had a specific quality of Saturday afternoon quiet, the fluorescent lights doing their work, the distant phone ringing and being answered the coffee maker in the break room, audible as a background hiss, and Leon Calloway sat on the bench with his hands folded and his posture easy, and said nothing for 14 seconds, which is not a long time in any objective sense, but is a long time in a room where a man is sitting with a secret and choosing the moment to use it. He watched Garrett return to the bullpen with the proprietary confidence of a man on his home floor, watched him lean against a desk and say something to another officer that produced a brief laugh, and Leon noted the ease of it, the unconcerned ease of a man who had spent the past hour doing something he was certain he could defend, and he added it to the inventory. Then the doors at the front of the precinct opened and the lobby stopped being quiet. The change was not in the sound, which was minimal. The soft hydraulic close of glass doors, the measured footsteps of people moving with purpose, but in something harder to name the specific atmospheric shift that occurs when a space is entered by people who know exactly what they are there for, and carry that knowledge in the way they move so that the room reorganizes itself around them before a single word is spoken. Agent Victoria Reyes came through first, and behind her 9 agents in Navy FBI windbreakers, their credentials visible, their body cameras already active, their pace measured and their positioning deliberate. Not aggressive, but unambiguous, the way a river is unambiguous when it has decided where it is going. Briggs was on her feet. Reyes identified herself and her team with the efficiency of someone who has done this many times and has reduced it to its essential elements. Special Agent Victoria Reyes, FBI. We are here in connection with the detention of Marcus Calloway, minor age 16, who we have reason to believe is being held in this facility without proper legal basis. She produced her credentials and held them where Briggs could read them. Briggs confirmed that Marcus was in holding room 3. Reyes asked for the body camera footage from both officers at the scene, the dash camera footage from the patrol vehicle. The full arrest report is submitted, and the dispatch audio recording from the initial call. She named each item the way you name items on a list you prepared in advance because she had, and the list was thorough. Garrett emerged from the bullpen with his hand moving toward his belt before his brain had caught up with what his hand was doing, and 3 agents shifted their positioning without a word. No escalation, no command, simply a change in geometry that communicated through pure spatial information that the hand motion was not a productive direction to continue, and the hand stopped. Garrett said that this was a local matter, that the jurisdiction belonged to Riverside PD, that a federal team descending on a retail theft case was disproportionate. Reyes looked at him with the specific expression of someone who has been handed an argument they do not intend to engage with and does not intend to be rude about it either. She said that when a minor is detained without proper legal basis, denied access to a phone call, and held following evidence of his innocence, the matter becomes federal. She cited the statute clearly from memory, and that the local jurisdiction had concluded at the moment those conditions were met. She asked for holding room 3. Garrett looked at Holt, who had come out of his office at the sound of the commotion, and found in Holt's face no available support. Holt was looking at Reyes's credentials with the expression of a man doing arithmetic, whose answer he does not want to reach but cannot avoid. 2 agents peeled from the group and moved toward the holding room corridor. The lobby remained otherwise still. 2 officers who had been at their desks had not moved and were not moving, not because they were comfortable, but because comfort was not a factor available to them right now. And Leon Calloway sat on the bench in the corner and said nothing, and watched it all with the attention of a man who has been waiting for this specific moment for 28 minutes, and intends to receive it fully. Devereaux emerged from the holding room corridor with Marcus, and Marcus came through the door into the lobby and stopped, taking in the room. The agents, Reyes, Garrett against the far wall, Holt in the office doorway, Briggs at the desk, everything rearranged from the configuration it had been in when he arrived. He was looking for something in the room, his eyes moving, and then they found the bench in the corner, and the man on it stood up, and Marcus said, "Dad." Barely a sound, more breath than word. But the word reached Garrett, and what it did to his face was worth the 28 minutes of waiting to see. The word "Dad" crossed the lobby in the specific way that quiet words do in quiet rooms without effort, without amplification, landing everywhere simultaneously. And Ryan Garrett heard it and looked at the man rising from the bench in the corner, and his brain began the work of connecting what he saw to what it meant. The man on the bench was black late 40s, broad-shouldered in civilian clothes, dark jeans, a gray shirt, a jacket that was not remarkable, and Garrett had categorized him when he had first emerged from the bullpen and seen him sitting there as distressed parent, which was the most available explanation, and the one that required the least revision of his existing understanding of the situation. But the 10 agents had come in before this man stood up, and they had come in at his signal. Garrett had seen the phone go into the pocket before the door opened, had clocked the timing even in the middle of managing the agent's arrival, and there was something in the way the agents had positioned themselves relative to this man, something in the specific arrangement of their deference that was not the deference of a team accompanying a civilian, but of a team operating under a command structure. And that observation was arriving in Garrett's mind now, 3 seconds after the word "Dad" connecting to the 10 agents and the FBI credentials and the formal statutory language Reyes had used, and the list of evidence she had requested from prepared memory. Leon crossed the lobby in 3 strides and put both hands on Marcus's shoulders and did what fathers do when they reach their children after something has happened, scanned for damage with the eyes, cataloged it, stored it somewhere internal for later, and held him briefly a hug that was compressed into several seconds, because there were things that needed to happen in this room before the hug could be a full one, and Marcus understood this and did not resist the shortening of it. Garrett's face had been doing something for the past 8 seconds that faces do when they are processing information that requires a fundamental revision of a structural assumption. Not a single dramatic change, but a series of small adjustments. each one leaving the face closer to a place that could not be untraveled. And by the time Leon turned from Marcus to face the room, Garrett's face had completed the journey. The flush was gone, the ease was gone. The proprietary confidence of a man on his home floor was entirely gone, and what was left was the specific exposed pallor of someone who has just understood the full weight of what they have signed their name to. Leon identified himself formally, Regional Director, FBI Midwest Division, 24 years federal law enforcement, and the room received this information in the way rooms receive information that changes the coordinates of everything. Briggs at the desk going very still. Holt in the doorway, gripping the frame. Devereaux somewhere behind Marcus, pressing his back against the corridor wall, the two officers at their desks looking at their screens without seeing them. Reyes confirmed the evidence collection status, all items secured, body camera footage, flagged dash camera footage extracted, arrest report, archived dispatch, audio preserved. And Leon nodded and turned to Garrett with the full attention of a man who has been building to this moment for the past 28 minutes, and finds now that it has arrived that he is in no hurry to rush through it. He asked Garrett if he had anything he wanted to say. Garrett opened his mouth. The room waited. What came out was the beginning of a justification. The description, the proximity, the protocol, and it stopped, because even as the words arrived, Garrett could hear them arriving in a room full of federal agents and a regional director, and a camera on Devereaux's chest that was still active and still recording. And the acoustics of this room were not the acoustics of the parking lot, and the justification sounded in these acoustics like something different than it had sounded when he was composing it at his desk an hour ago. He stopped speaking. Leon waited one more second to be certain Garrett was finished, and then he began. Marcus had walked 34 steps from holding room 3 to the lobby doorway. He had counted them not because the counting served any particular purpose, but because counting was something to do with the mind while the body was walking. And in the past hour the mind had needed things to do, had been finding them continuously, had been working hard at the business of maintaining itself intact inside a 10 by 10 room that had not been designed with that particular project in mind. He had not known what to expect on the other side of the door. Devereaux had said there are people here for you with the expression of someone delivering information whose meaning he could not fully translate, and Marcus had stood from the chair in one motion and followed without asking for clarification, because clarification would come when the door opened and the door was 34 steps away. And then it was 12, and then it was 2. The lobby was bright after the holding room's flat light, and it took a moment for his eyes to adjust. And in that moment he took in the room in pieces. The agents first, their windbreakers and credentials, and the particular focused stillness of people who are present in a professional capacity but feel something personal underneath it. Then Garrett against the far wall, and the thing that had happened to Garrett's face which Marcus registered and filed with everything else. Then Reyes, who took a step toward him and asked if he was injured. He touched his cheek where the asphalt had made its mark. The scrape had scabbed lightly, and he had not looked at it since the holding room did not have a mirror, and mentioned his shoulder, the socket ache that had been his constant companion for the past hour and a half. He said he was okay, and the okay was true, in the specific sense that he was intact and ambulatory, and in possession of his full faculties, and in no immediate danger, and less comprehensively true, in the broader sense that the afternoon had done things to him that were going to require time and space to process, and that the processing would not be straightforward. Then his eyes found the bench and the man standing up from it, and the recognition was immediate and full, and arrived without transition. No gradual understanding, no building toward the realization. Just the simple overwhelming fact of his father crossing the lobby and putting both hands on his shoulders and scanning him with the specific intensity of a father looking for evidence of harm. The hug was brief and fierce and compressed. There were things in this room that needed to happen. And then his father pulled back and looked at him with eyes that were doing many things simultaneously. And what Marcus saw in them was not distress, not the panicked relief of a parent who has found a child after a scare, but something steadier and sadder and more complex than that, the face of a man who made a calculated decision and is living with the full weight of what the calculation cost, and who is not going to pretend the weight is lighter than it is. "Marcus," said Dad once more quietly, just to say it, just to confirm that the words still worked in the way words should. His father nodded a single complete nod that said, "I know I'm here. I see all of it." And then he turned to face the room, and his voice changed, and the father receded, and the regional director stepped forward. And what followed was 20 minutes that Ryan Garrett would spend the rest of his career trying to forget. Leon did not raise his voice. This was in some ways the most significant thing about the next 20 minutes, because raised voices are what people expect when a father discovers that his child has been handcuffed and pressed to asphalt and held for 93 minutes on the basis of evidence that was disproven within the first hour, and the absence of a raised voice created a quality of attention in the room that a raised voice would have disrupted everyone listening more carefully than they would have if they had been managing the noise, everyone hearing each word with the full force of its actual weight, rather than the filter of emotional volume. He described what the mall footage had shown him in sequence without editorializing the boy at the register at 2:43 p.m. The receipt in the bag, the walk to the south exit, Garrett's approach, the commands. Before any question had been asked, the shopping bag torn open, the receipt held for 2 seconds, and discarded the store clerk arriving with an electronic transaction record and being told to step back. The weapon drawn against a boy on his knees with his hands above his head, the 43 seconds of knee pressure while the boy said he could not breathe, the handcuffs tighter than protocol required. He noted the times at which each civil rights protection had been violated, the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth, the 14th, with the precision of a man who has prosecuted these violations in federal court and knows exactly which language carries and which doesn't and why. He turned to Holt and addressed the photographs from the security footage, the actual suspect in a red hoodie at Tech Corner at 2:38, the timestamp, 2 minutes and 37 seconds before Pruitt's radio call, visible from 2 cameras, unmistakably not Marcus, and he described Holt's choice to continue the procedure after seeing them, and he described it without accusation as a choice, and the absence of accusation made it more damning than an accusation would have. He asked Marcus formally 4 questions. Was he informed of the legal basis for his detention before the search began? Was consent requested before his belongings were examined? Was he read his rights at any point prior to the handcuffing? Was he provided access to a phone call at any point during his time in the facility? Marcus answered each question in the same even voice he had used in the holding room. No, no, not until the handcuffs were already on. No, and each answer went into the record that Reyes's body camera and the lobby camera and Devereaux's still active chest camera were all simultaneously creating. Garrett attempted once to offer the description: black male, dark hoodie, backpack, proximity to the theft, and Leon stopped him with a single sentence delivered with the quietness of a man who has been building to it for 28 minutes, and finds now that it is here, that it does not need volume to carry its weight. The description you followed was black male in a hoodie. My son is 16 years old. He had a receipt. He had a witness. He had his backpack full of calculus notes and a birthday gift for his sister. You had every reason to stop and none to proceed, and you proceeded. That choice belongs to you. So does what comes next. The room held the sentence for several seconds without anyone attempting to respond to it. Leon turned to Reyes. Open the federal investigation. Civil Rights, Title 18, Section 242. I want the full case file routed to the division by end of day Monday. Yes, sir. He turned to Holt. You'll receive formal notification from the U.S. Attorney's Office by Tuesday. Cooperate fully. Holt nodded a motion that contained no resistance whatsoever. Leon put his hand on Marcus's shoulder. and the regional director stepped back, and the father stepped forward and he said, "Let's go home." They walked toward the door together, and the lobby watched them go, and no one in the room said anything at all until the glass door had fully closed behind them. The suspension came at 6:17 p.m., which was 41 minutes after Leon and Marcus walked out of the lobby, and it came through Holt, who knocked on the door of the break room, where Garrett had gone after the lobby emptied. Gone in the specific way of a man who needs to be somewhere with walls around him, somewhere that is not the bullpen where the other officers are doing their best not to look at him and not entirely succeeding. Holt stood in the doorway of the break room with his hands in front of him and his face arranged into the expression of a man performing a task he has been dreading and finds in the execution exactly as bad as anticipated. And he told Garrett that he was suspended without pay, effective immediately pending the federal investigation, and that he needed his badge and his service weapon. Garrett placed them on the break room table in the sequence that felt most orderly: badge first, because the badge was lighter, and then the weapon unloaded before placement, the motion of clearing the chamber, carrying in the small room, with a finality that was physical before it was metaphorical. He looked at them on the table for a moment, the specific weight of looking at things that have been part of your daily life for 14 years and are now no longer yours. And then he looked away because there was nothing useful to be found in continuing to look. Frank Callery, the union representative, arrived at 6:45, and Garrett had been hoping that Frank's arrival would produce the specific relief that institutional protection provides, the sense of a larger body absorbing the impact of a difficult situation. And Frank sat across from him in the break room with Garrett's file open on the table between them and looked at it for a long time before he spoke. He told Garrett without preamble that the union could not provide defense counsel for a federally documented civil rights violation of this evidentiary quality, that the body camera footage from Devereaux's chest camera alone constituted a record that precluded any version of the events that would be worth defending in a federal proceeding, and that the additional footage from 22 civilian phones, the store clerk's transaction record, the mall security footage showing the actual suspect, and the holding room camera's capture of Devereaux, telling Marcus he was innocent, and then leaving him for another hour, created a case that no union contract was designed to absorb. Frank closed the file and said he was sorry, and Garrett believed that the sorry was genuine, which somehow made it more, rather than less, difficult to sit with. After Frank left, Garrett sat alone in the break room for a long time, long enough for the building to quiet into its evening configuration, the day shift gone, the overnight, beginning its different rhythms, and he sat with the particular interior experience of a man who has been told by the institution he trusted to protect him that the protection has limits, and that he has exceeded them, and that he is now alone with what he has done in a way that no procedural language can soften. He thought about the parking lot. He thought about it with an honesty that he had not, in the hours since it happened, been applying thought about the moment he pulled into the lot and looked through the windshield and saw Marcus, and thought about what information he had actually had in that moment, which was black male teenager, dark hoodie backpack, and a name he did not know, and a face he had not asked the name to, and thought about what he had done with that information, which was to decide before asking a single question what it meant. He had not thought of himself as someone who did that. He had a clear, practiced self-image that did not include the word prejudice, and would have pushed back against it with genuine indignation 2 hours ago, and the pushing back would have felt sincere, because the self-image was sincere. And the distance between a sincere self-image and the thing you actually do in a parking lot on a Saturday afternoon when you see a black teenager with a backpack near a mall that has had retail thefts is one of the most dangerous distances in the world, because it is invisible until something forces you to measure it. He was measuring it now in a break room that smelled of burnt coffee, and that he would be asked to leave within the hour with his badge on the table and his 14-year career in a folder on Frank Callery's passenger seat. And the measurement was uncomfortable in the specific way of accurate things that you have been successfully avoiding. Leon Calloway had said that choice belongs to you, and Garrett was beginning to understand in the break room quiet that this was not a condemnation, or not only a condemnation, but a statement about where the work had to start if it was going to start anywhere. The choice had been his. The next choice would also be his. What he did with the distance between the self-image and the parking lot, whether he closed it or papered over it, or simply learned to live at a different address, was something no federal investigation could decide for him. He sat with this for a while. Then he got up, rinsed his coffee cup, turned off the break room light, and walked out. 2 days later, on a Monday morning, when the air had the particular clarity that follows a weekend of accumulated heat, Carol Simmons arrived at Riverside PD, carrying her store tablet in a leather case she had charged it the night before, and backed up the transaction record in 2 separate places, because she had been in the retail industry long enough to know that the specific irony of a piece of evidence you need vanishing from a device you thought was reliable was the kind of irony that arrived without warning and left without apology. Agent Reyes met her in the lobby and walked her to a conference room that had been designated for witness statements, and Carol sat across from a transcript specialist and gave her account in the sequence it had occurred, beginning with Marcus at her register at 2:43 p.m., and ending with herself standing in the parking lot, watching the patrol car's taillights disappear at the lot's exit, her tablet still showing the transaction, the rose gold hoodie on the ground 3 feet from her right shoe. She was accurate, and she was specific, and she did not embellish because the unembellished version was sufficient, and she had understood that from the moment she ran out of the mall's south exit with her tablet in both hands, that the plain facts were enough if only someone would receive them. And now someone was receiving them with full attention, and a pen that moved continuously, and Carol felt something release in her chest that she had not known was being held. After the formal statement was complete, she asked Reyes if Marcus knew she had tried. Reyes told her that he did. Carol's shoulders moved a small motion, barely visible, but the motion of weight being set down rather than shifted, and she said okay, and then sat quietly for a moment before gathering her tablet and her case and standing. She had already placed the order for the replacement rose gold hoodie and scrunchie set before she left her apartment that morning, paid for it herself without calculation or deliberation, because some things you do not deliberate about, and she had included a handwritten note on the cardstock that the store gave out for gift cards. The note said, "For Brianna. Happy birthday, with apologies for the delay. C.S." She had sent it to the Callaway address which Reyes had provided at Carol's request, and she had not told anyone about it because it was not the kind of thing you tell people about. Mrs. Elaine Morse arrived at 11, and she arrived in the manner of a woman who has done things like this before and considers it part of the ordinary business of living, not reluctantly, not with the performance of reluctance, simply practically in comfortable shoes with a small notebook in her purse that she consulted once to confirm a timestamp she wanted to cite precisely. Her statement was not long. She described what she had seen from her position in the crowd, beginning with the moment she turned from the mall entrance toward the commotion and ending with the patrol car leaving. And her account was detailed and accurate in a way that years of attending school board meetings and neighborhood watch sessions and every kind of civic proceeding that the city of Riverside had offered her over the course of 31 years had made her particularly equipped to produce. At the end, before the specialist had indicated that they were done, Mrs. Morse said something that she had not written in the notebook and had not prepared. She said that she had watched this happen to people she knew for 31 years. And that the difference this time was not that it had happened to someone important. It had always happened to people who were important to the people who loved them, but that someone had written it down in a room where the writing could not be quietly misplaced. Reyes wrote this down verbatim and underlined it and read it back to confirm she had the words correct, and Mrs. Morse confirmed it, and the session ended. Dennis Pruitt, who had set the entire afternoon in motion with a radio call that described a red hoodie as dark, a white man in his 20s, as a black teenager, a north exit as a south exit, and the absence of a backpack as a backpack had been suspended by his contracting firm 48 hours after the incident, when the contracting firm's legal counsel contacted Leon's office in the interest of managing their exposure before it was managed for them, which was not the same as accountability but produced some of its practical effects. Pruitt was 58 years old. He had been working mall security for 22 years and had never, not once, been required to stop and examine the internal mechanisms that had produced a description that was wrong in every factual element. The first time in 22 years that an assumption of his had a consequence was this week in this conference room in this city because of a 16-year-old boy who had followed every instruction correctly and been handcuffed anyway. The contracting firm had lost the Riverside Crossing security contract by Friday. They had not contested the loss. 3 weeks later, on a Sunday morning that came in through the apartment windows as the particular gold of a summer that had finally settled into its warmth without apology, Marcus was at the kitchen table eating cereal when Brianna shuffled in from her room wearing the rose gold hoodie. She had been wearing it for 3 weeks, which was exactly what Marcus had predicted had worn it to school on the first day back, after her birthday weekend had worn it to her friend Danielle's house, had worn it on a Wednesday when it was 63 degrees, and the hoodie was not technically the right weight for the weather, but she wore it anyway because 13-year-olds wear the things they love, regardless of meteorological logic. She poured herself cereal and sat down across from him and looked at her phone. And Marcus looked at her, and the particular experience of watching his sister exist in a piece of clothing he had almost not been able to get to her was something that the past 3 weeks had not diminished. It was still there. Every time the specific fullness of it, she looked up and caught him watching because she always caught him, and she said what in the tone of someone who knows exactly what and is choosing the question anyway. He said nothing. Just you. She rolled her eyes with the specific velocity of a 13-year-old who has received a sincere moment and is not yet equipped to receive it without deflection, and went back to her phone. His own navy hoodie hung on the hook by the apartment door, the one he had been wearing that Saturday, washed now, back in its regular position. He had considered in the first days after whether to keep it, and the consideration had lasted about 20 minutes before he decided that the answer was yes, because he was not going to organize his wardrobe around what had happened to him in it, because the hoodie had not done anything wrong, and neither had he, and giving it away would be giving something away that he was not willing to give. The federal investigation into Ryan Garrett was ongoing, the kind of process that moves at institutional speed, which is slower than most people would prefer, and more durable than most people expect, and the outcomes were not yet resolved, but the direction was clear and the documentation was comprehensive, and Leon had described it to Marcus in the way that Leon described procedural things, with precision and without editorial trusting. Marcus to form his own conclusions, which was a form of respect that Marcus had always recognized and valued. Devereaux had submitted a full and unedited witness statement, every detail, every moment, including the moments where he had stood 4 feet away and said nothing, and known with the specific knowledge of a man who is watching something wrong happen and has not yet found the version of himself who would stop it, and had requested a transfer to a different unit, and the request had been approved, and the transfer was his to build something with. Sergeant Holt had received a formal reprimand from the U.S. Attorney's Office. Dennis Pruitt's contracting firm had lost the Riverside Crossings contract. Carol Simmons's handwritten note was tacked to the corkboard above Marcus's desk, next to the MIT move-in instructions and a photo of Brianna from last Easter. Marcus finished his cereal and rinsed his bowl and set it in the rack and picked up the MIT roommate questionnaire from the counter. He had been meaning to finish it for 2 weeks, had started it twice, and set it down, not because it was difficult, but because the past 3 weeks had rearranged his sense of what the important things were, and filling out a questionnaire had not immediately made the new list. He sat back down. He wrote his name across the top, Marcus Calloway, and found the question that asked him to describe himself in 3 words, and he sat with it for a moment, the pencil in his hand. Then he wrote, "Patient precise, going somewhere." He put the pencil down. Outside the window, Riverside was doing what it always did on a Sunday morning. The same street, the same light, the same world, and Marcus was still in it, and MIT was 6 weeks away, and Brianna was eating cereal across from him in the rose gold hoodie, and the morning was in the way that matters most entirely ordinary. He picked the pencil back up and finished the questionnaire. If this story moved you, we'd be grateful if you shared it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. Justice is worth talking about. So are the people who fight for it.